Hello, everyone. Welcome to Eileen Fisher's Women Together. It's a beautiful Tuesday, and I'm so glad to be with all of us together again. And I know we are all just joining. So, one way that we like to welcome ourselves and each other here just to land is to type into the chat. So, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat button, and you can type in a little hello, where you're coming from today. I'm Antoinette. I'm your host for Women Together, and I'm standing on Lenape land, what's known as Cortland Manor, New York, and it's bright and sunny and beautiful, and it's been feeling like the entrance into summer here in New York. So we have a wonderful array of friends from all over. It looks like we are coming in from Sarasota, Toronto, Idaho, Ellicott City, Maryland, Connecticut, New York, Chicago, Virginia, Vermont, originally Abenaki land, West Newbury, Massachusetts, Norfolk, Virginia, Central Mass, Delray Beach, Florida. I'm seeing some familiar places like Oswego, Oakland, Boynton Beach, Vancouver, BC. Warm welcome to everyone, wherever you may be, whichever little spot of land your feet are somehow connected to. Ottawa, Long Island, wonderful. So I know we are all coming in on Zoom, and we are also coming in on YouTube. So warm welcome to wherever you may be viewing, or if you're viewing a little later, a warm welcome to all of us. We have been meeting week after week throughout the course of the last 14 months or so, in order to just land in ourselves and be reminded of the practices that we have to be more of who we are wherever we may be. So whether that's in our own homes or in our newly emerging social lives for some of us that are returning, perhaps the many ways that we are finding to connect with each other. I know that some of us have been able to gather, and sometimes that feels really great. And for a lot of us, that may feel a little nerve-wracking or anxiety producing. So however it may feel for you, that's just being with that for this moment, wherever you may be in this last week or today, just noticing where you are, what you're coming in with. And then, as we practice together, today we'll dive into generous listening. And as we practice together, just noticing how that inner state of being affects any other part of our lives. And so we'll just sit with that a little bit over this next hour. So warm welcome to those of you who have been here before. I'm just going through the gallery, and it's so fun to just say hello in my own little way, to see so many of our familiar faces, and a warm welcome if you're just joining for the first time. It's great to have you here. We like to do tiny practices, and a tiny practice is a way to just allow us to get ground and get centered, often before Eileen Fisher meetings, or for me, any meeting that I go into is just to take a little breath, take a moment before I go in and tune in to where I am today, what's going on internally. I've been having allergies over the last few weeks, and so just feeling into the sensations of the body. Sometimes that's like, oh, my shoulders, or something's happening. And sometimes it's tuning into the emotional state, or maybe another state that you might be coming in with. Maybe you had a conversation with someone this morning and it ticked you off, and then you're going into the rest of your day with that. And so just tuning in for a moment, landing where we are, reminding ourselves of our connection to the earth, our connection to the breath, what it means to be human, just for a moment before we go about our day, can actually give us the strength, the resilience, the fortitude to be able to walk into the next conversation or the next little bit of our lives. So we do a tiny practice to not take us out of our lives and go out somewhere else, but actually to be here, to be in this place, to accept what's going on in this moment with a little more grace, perhaps. So as I go and knock everything down, right? So here we are practicing grace and however that shows up. And what we can do is, I know it's so funny. It's like we just keep looking for something to do. So here's how we're going to do a moment of stillness, when it's right there. It's with us all the time. It's like, yeah, we can get our back a little straighter, but wouldn't it be great if we just had that posture, or we just accepted what posture we do have. So wherever you may be, if it feels comfortable for you to get your feet on the ground, you can do that. If it feels comfortable to just close your eyes or lower your gaze and just tune the gaze inward for a moment, or soften the gaze, the connection with the world outside our little body. And just for a moment, tune into the breath. As we soften the gaze into the world outside, we can start to tune into that maybe more mundane, but also pretty amazing experience of the breath moving in and out of the body. And I'll ring the sound of a singing bowl to mark the beginning of our moment of stillness, and I'll ring the sound of the singing bowl to bring us back. So when you are ready, you can return to the screen and to our connection with each other. I feel like I'm never actually ready, but um, how wonderful it is that we get to connect to each other, and we'll have ample time to actually move into breakouts in just a little while to really more deeply, we call this Women Together, connect, because at the fundamental core of what we know is that, to connect with each other is magic. And when women connect with each other, then there's some little element of possibility that gets opened up and explored and deepened. And so we find a lot of joy, potentially, a lot of listening to each other. And today's topic is actually on generous listening. And it's something that we keep coming back to. It's kind of like our home base, or our most basic function, because it's actually probably the key to any of the other pieces that we're trying to do. Last week, we had Tootie Scott come in. She's an incredible teacher, and I think many of us were blown away by what she shared. And she shared a little bit of her own life story, and her own practices around a topic of women and money. And I felt like we could have our own little series on women and money, because really, when we're tuning into that element of our lives, there's so much that comes up, because money is the energy of how we interact with each other. And so Tootie talked a little bit about chakras, and she talked about our identity and how this all connects with tangible action with money. And I personally will need to go back and review that talk again and again, because there are some just elements of gold in there. And it reminded me that when we hear something like that, it's easy to get sucked into another person's story or another person's way of doing things or way of being. And for me, when I've been reconnecting with people, now that many of us are vaccinated and the restrictions have been eased a little bit, here in New York at least, I've been connecting with other people, and I find that I start to go down these rabbit holes of their lives and what's going on and what's happening. And I'm so excited about it. And it can be distracting in the best possible way, but it's also distracting from where I am and my own voice. And so I wanted to just give us a sense with generous listening to come back to ourselves. Because often when I think about listening, I think about how I'm going to listen to other people and how I'm going to show up for someone else. And that's a beautiful part of it. And what would happen if we applied that generous listening factor to ourselves first? So that's what I thought we could talk about today. And before we go into anything about that or a tiny practice, I thought we could just hear from each other in the chat. What is coming up for you and what brought you to today's conversation, Women Together Connect on generous listening, or just what brought you here today? And I will look in both the Zoom chat and the YouTube chat and see what comes up. So feel free to type away. Elaine said, a friend says when we forget what we were going to say, we were listening. Awesome. Lisa said the topic is I'm a life coach and can always improve my skills. Lakshmi, it's my weekly therapy session to calm myself down. Wonderful. Reconditioning for Marion. My 1 hour dose of inspiration for Marilyn. Sandy, this is my weekly fix. Barbara, I have felt not listened to lately. Janice, as a holistic practitioner, listening is my most important part of an appointment. Laurinette, listening to what I need, connecting with women together. Beautiful. Wonderful. So there are so many reasons that listening is important. I find that, as was said already, is that listening. So, when Janice says listening is my most important part of an appointment, it's, when I think about holistic practitioner, like any kind of body worker or, even doctor, we go in expecting a diagnosis of what's going on. And yet what they're doing is listening to what we're saying, but more than that, listening to our body, what our body is saying and what our cues are saying. And Barbara, when you said I've felt not listened to lately, isn't that the thing? I have felt not listened to lately. I wonder how many of us, if we just did our little raised hands, I have felt not listened to lately. I've got hands, nods. Yeah. Digital hands. Yeah. You are not alone, first of all, in that. And I think one of the things that we do often is we look outside for that which we're needing the most. We look for somebody to listen to us. We look for someone else to hear this inner voice. And I often find that exactly what it is that I'm looking for, that I'm needing out there, is actually something that I really needed here first. And I often find when I say to my partner, my friends, you're not hearing me, or, this is really important and I don't feel, it's actually, I'm projecting out exactly what's happening inside. there's this voice in me. There are so many ages of Antoinette. There's 9-year-old Antoinette, 12-year-old Antoinette, 20-year-old Antoinette. That's kind of there saying, hey, you abandoned me. You went out and you did something else. So when I'm feeling, that feeling that I'm not getting from somewhere else, what is it that I need to do to turn that lens back on myself and provide that? And of course, that doesn't mean that it's not actually happening in the world and that relationship might be toxic and time to go. But there's also this initial element of listening to ourselves first. And Pat says it is so dismissive to be shut out. And I wonder, where is it that I'm doing that to myself, that I'm shutting myself out? I'm shutting out that intuitive voice, the voice that knows what it needs, the body's voice that knows that, I'm tired. It's time to sit down. It's time to relax. Or, that it's actually time to get up and go out and do things that I haven't done, or go out for a walk and just move the body. The body knows, and how often are we actually listening to it? Carolyn said, how about when someone listens without acknowledgement? And I find that really interesting. Wonder about, how about when someone listens without judgment? What happens when we're really, really listened to? And I, find this when we're listened to and someone gives advice. There's a kind of immediate, like, I say, I've been thinking about this thing, or I'm, struggling with this conversation with my mom or with whoever. And someone says, oh, well, I've had that. I know exactly what you're going through. I went through that. And this is what you need to do immediately. And so on some level, yes, there's an acknowledgement of, yeah, I heard what you said, right? So there's that baseline, but then immediately it's tainted by their own experience. Immediately it sort of takes me out of the picture altogether, right? What is it that makes me feel dismissed or abandoned or not heard? It's that person is just wildly going down their own, memory lane and saying that this is what I need to do. And often as a friend, I think about how, tricky it is when someone tells me what's going on. I'm like, what do I say? How do I make them feel better? What do I give them? What do I give them that shows that I'm listening? What is it that I give them to show that I care? And sometimes advice is the first thing we can lean on, because it shows empathy, right? It shows that I care. But if we actually take that a little bit deeper and say that actually the gift that I'm giving is really listening, it's my presence. It's that I'm holding space for you to go through what you need to go through in this moment. And maybe it's asking a question that takes that person deeper. And it's not a leading question of, have you thought about doing this thing? It's the open question. How did that make you feel? Or what happened next? That shows inquiry, curiosity. So, those ways that we need to listen to ourselves and listen to each other. And often, the thing that we need to do for ourselves, when we do it for ourselves first, we show up and do it for someone else. And they then in turn feel that and are able to give that back to us. Francis says, I want the feedback, no matter how difficult. That's a gift. Personally, I agree with that. I think feedback is gold. I also think that there are agreements that we make with each other. And sometimes those agreements can be, really useful. And sometimes they're just not really something that we've actually talked about. I just read at the same time that I'm talking, Marsha's note, don't expect friends to be therapists. It's dangerous and unrealistic. Beautiful. When is it that we're going to our friends or our family and looking for something that they're just not prepared to give? And how often do we set that agreement beforehand? Do we say, oh, hey, I really need advice right now? Or, oh, hey, I really just want to tell you how I'm feeling. Or, we get into a conversation or we get into an interaction and we don't even know what the actual underlying agreement is of what brought us here into this conversation. Marty says, I get so frustrated when repair people or contractors do not listen to me when I describe an issue and the elements pertinent to it being resolved. I also appreciate this, and I read it out because I think there are these moments where we don't feel heard and we need to be heard, and we might not be heard because of our identity and pieces of who we are. And Tootie brought up a lot of those identifiers last week, a lot of places that there are social inequities. Racial inequality is one thing that comes up right away. Gender inequality, just the sheer fact. I remember my mother became a landlord at one point, and she was like, had to get everyone to listen to her, and she has to have these conversations, and what she had to steel herself against just because she was a woman. And I know many, many of us, I myself have absolutely gone through those pieces. Carly says, communication is more complex than we care to admit. She says, listen to the hidden brain, why conversations go wrong. Carly, I'm thinking that's a book that you're sharing with us. So yeah, these aspects of communication, podcast. Thanks, Carly. Yeah, these aspects of what it means to give each other the gift of listening, and give ourselves the gift of listening. So I thought before we do give each other the gift of listening, we do a little journaling practice, and give ourselves a moment to land in ourselves and to really apply this listening practice to ourselves first. So if you have a piece of paper and a pen, that's a great place to start, because sometimes the work of the hands allows you to put something on paper that you didn't necessarily even know was going on in the brain, because there are other parts of our bodies that are speaking through our hands. So what I'll do is I'll do a little guided journaling practice. And what I'd like to do is, I've just given you probably a couple minutes to get a piece of paper and a pen, or at least a place to type. I will read a question and you can write. And that's the key to journaling, is just putting the pen on the paper and seeing what comes through. So the first one that I'd like to ask is, whose voices do we carry with us? And I mentioned some of my own voices. I have my little 9-year-old Antoinette, my 12-year-old Antoinette. Those are my, they're parts of her voice that's there. And I grew up with my mother. So I grew up very closely with my mother. And I'm sure you've heard many times me refer to my mom. Her voice is always in my head, whether I want it there or not sometimes. And it's a gift and I take it with me, but just noticing whose voices are always there with us. Maybe it's mom, maybe it's grandma, maybe it's dad, someone else. Maybe it's the little version of yourself. I had a friend when I was very young who was a very good artist. And she knew how to draw. And I've carried her voice with me on little things that I try to do. So there's some of these little voices that kind of stick with us. Some of those are really useful and some not so much. My friend's voice was really useful on some level because I learned a lot from her, but I also learned this voice in my own head that said, you can't draw, to me. So just noticing both of those things. I may have learned a lot and I learned how to be artistic, but I also felt a sense of self-doubt. So just jotting down, I'll give you a moment, stop talking, but whose voices do we carry in our own minds? And then if you think about where you are now and who you are now, what was a turning point moment that brought you here? What was a turning point moment in your own life that brought you to this point in time? And then tuning in from that turning point moment to where you are now, what are some of the emerging possibilities that you've been feeling over the recent weeks and months? So, where are you sensing something emerging? And it could be that you picked up a hobby or you're starting to reconnect with people. Um, Perhaps you read a book that's inspired an idea. But where are you sensing possibilities? For me, I've been out in the garden again. So, where are you sensing possibilities in your own life that have been emerging over the recent weeks and months? And then, if you could pick one of those possibilities or go deeper into one of them, what would you need to let go of in order to step into that possibility? So, just letting any one of those voices speak to you, what would you need to let go of now to step more deeply into that possibility? So sometimes it's just a priority, like I decide to prioritize the garden over blah, blah, blah. But sometimes it's something deeper. Perhaps it's a voice that you need to let go of in your own mind. Perhaps for me, it's a voice of self doubt. So, what would you need to let go of in order to step into that possibility? I'm just looking for a moment at what came up for you about what you would need to let go of. What are you needing to learn now? Perhaps it's a specific skill. Perhaps it's a behavior or a mindset. Maybe it's a little bit of compassion. If it was similar to my self doubt one, compassion is really a great one to go deeper with. But what are you needing to learn now? And you could listen to any of those voices that are coming up for you, but what are you needing to learn now? And just see what comes up on the page. When you're ready, you can look up at me and smile, because that's how I collect my smiles for the day. um, and wonderful. What we'll do is we'll turn to each other for 20 minutes and just share what's coming up for you. And, so if you're in Zoom, you'll turn to each other in breakouts. If you're on YouTube, maybe you want to go make a new agreement with a friend or family member and share with them what's coming up. See if they have capacity to hear you right now and to listen. Or maybe you go on a little walk. Maybe it's just a walk around the house. Maybe it's a walk outside, but where you could just process what came up and take note before going on to the next thing. So if you're in Zoom, we have about 20 minutes where we can turn to each other and share with one another what came up. Feel free to share as much or as little as you want, but just make sure that everybody gets a time to speak, and really just giving each other a few minutes of that generous listening, remembering that we don't know what each other may have had for breakfast this morning, let alone what our lifetimes before this moment have looked like. So just really giving each other the space to be heard and seeing each face in front of you as pure potential, if you can hold that for them. So those are some little ground container building agreements to send you off into breakouts in order to hold generous listening with each other. And we'll see you in 20 minutes. Enjoy your time together.